An HOA officer ripped the backpack off 14-year-old Caleb. Without realizing it held a $100,000 artificial heart keeping him alive, Molly Bennett saw suspicious wires and acted like a self-appointed cop, ignoring every protocol and shred of human decency. But Caleb's mother, Laura, had one move left, and she wasn't about to let the system bury her son's story. Just wait until you see how this heartbreaking case took a stunning turn and why justice finally struck back. When Laura West heard the scream, it sliced through her like a blade. Short, ragged, throat-tearing. Not the sound of a skinned knee or some childish tantrum, but something primal, terrified, final. She dropped the sponge into the sink, bolted from the kitchen, and ran barefoot across the front lawn, her heart hammering so hard it drowned out the world. And then she saw him. Her 14-year-old son, Caleb, was crumpled face down in the grass near the HOA community swing set, his limbs twisted unnaturally. His backpack was torn wide open, its fabric hanging like shredded skin. Zipper snapped, stitching burst, wires spilling like intestines. And standing over him, arms crossed, chest heaving, was a woman in a navy blazer and pressed khakis, a plastic badge swinging from a silver chain around her neck, HOA. Her name tag read M. Bennett. Her lips were tight with triumph, her eyes scanning the growing circle of shocked neighbors with cool, reptilian calm. "I told him," she barked, voice shrill and proud. "No electronics in the public common area. What part of that isn't clear?" Laura didn't hear the rest. She dropped to her knees beside Caleb. His lips, oh God, his lips were blue. His chest wasn't moving. His eyes were open but blank, pupils shrinking. No, Caleb, baby, look at me, Caleb." Her voice cracked as she tried to roll him gently to his side. He was limp, dead weight. She yanked at the backpack strap, still tangled under his shoulder, trying to find... And then she saw it. Dangling from the torn mesh pocket was a dull silver capsule the size of a paperback, cracked, humming faintly but fading. A titanium artificial heart, portable, implanted, vital, worth $100,000. Their insurance only covered it once. This was the stopgap, the bridge keeping Caleb alive until the hospital could get him a permanent match. The backpack had been designed to shield it from impact, to stabilize temperature, to keep it hidden. And now it was gutted, like prey after a kill. She screamed, raw, animalistic. "Someone call an ambulance, he's not breathing!" But M. Bennett didn't flinch. Instead, she adjusted the collar of her blazer and took a half step back, speaking louder now, as if performing for the small crowd that had gathered, phones clutched, but unused. It was a suspicious device, wires, humming, it could have been anything. "We have policies, and he was warned. This is a secure community." Laura turned, eyes blazing. "He's a child. And children can be threats too," Bennett snapped. "It's not my job to guess what's dangerous. That's what protocol is for." "You ripped it off him. You killed his heart." He was uncooperative. He refused to explain what it was. He was evasive. "He's nonverbal under stress. He freezes up when strangers yell." "That's not in our files." Laura lunged at her, barely held back by a neighbor, a man she didn't even know, who wrapped his arms around her shoulders and whispered, "Ambulance is on the way. Stay with him. Stay with your boy." But her gaze stayed locked on Bennett, who had stepped onto the sidewalk like this was some sort of power play. "You had no right," Laura spat. "No goddamn right." "I had every right," Bennett replied coldly as sirens began to rise in the distance. "This is my jurisdiction." And that, she said, pointing at Caleb, looked like a bomb. The word dropped like poison. A few neighbors took a step back as if they suddenly weren't sure. As if maybe Bennett had a point. As if the wires, the blinking, the backpack, maybe it was suspicious. Maybe the boy was a threat, and Laura saw it, all of it, in their faces. The doubt, the distance. She cradled her son's body in her arms, rocking slightly, whispering his name over and over as the sirens screamed closer. Her hands were shaking. Her knees were wet with grass and blood and something else. All she could hear now was the voice in her head. "You should have walked with him. You should have never let him go alone. You should have..." She looked up at M. Bennett one last time. "You broke him," she said, almost a whisper. "And I swear to God, I will break you back. Caleb survived. Barely. It took 9 minutes to get him to the nearest clinic, and only because a school nurse, off-duty and driving home, happened to see the commotion from the road. She swerved into the cul-de-sac without a second thought, recognized the signs of cardiac failure instantly, and used her emergency bag to stabilize him long enough for EMTs to arrive. Even then, he flatlined once in the ambulance. For 5 full minutes, he was unconscious. No breath, no pulse. A team of 3 fought for him all the way to the ER. The doctors didn't sugarcoat it. If she'd reached him 30 seconds later, one said quietly to Laura in the hallway, we wouldn't be standing here. Laura stood frozen, gripping the metal rail along the hospital wall as the words settled in her bones. 30 seconds. Half a minute. 1 red light. 1 extra step to tie her shoe. That was the difference between her son being here. Or not. She didn't sleep that night. She didn't sleep the next night either. She just sat at the foot of Caleb's hospital bed, staring at the machines that beeped in slow, steady rhythm, counting the seconds between each pulse. 1 beat. 2. 3. Every beat was borrowed time now. The heart module, the $100,000 portable assistive device, was damaged beyond repair. The trauma from the backpack being ripped open had disrupted its stabilizing functions, severed one of the pressure lines, and caused a cascading failure in its backup power supply. The manufacturer confirmed it was non-repairable. Worse, the insurance policy only covered 1 unit. No replacements, no exceptions. And so began the second wave of devastation. While Laura tried to figure out how to get another module for her son, quickly because his condition was still unstable, the HOA sent her a formal notice. Not an apology, not a check, a notice. The letter was curt. Our internal review has concluded that our staff member, Miss M. Bennett, acted within the reasonable scope of her authority, in line with the neighborhood safety guidelines. No negligence was found. Furthermore, your behavior during and after the incident was deemed disruptive and hostile. A formal complaint has been filed regarding your aggressive conduct on HOA premises. Laura read it in the kitchen, standing alone by the sink. When she got to the last line, we hope for improved relations moving forward, she dropped the paper and covered her mouth. Then she slid to the floor. The sound that escaped her was not a sob, but a choked wail, silent, broken, like something had finally cracked wide open inside. She cried until her face was raw, until her chest ached from trying to stay quiet, until her fingers cramped from clutching the hospital discharge sheet she'd folded and unfolded a dozen times that day. At the top of the page, patient stabilized. Immediate replacement of primary cardiac module required. Beneath it, coverage denied. Caleb hadn't said much since he woke up, just nodded once to let her know he could hear, blinked twice when the nurse asked if he felt pain, but mostly he stared at the ceiling. The light above his bed flickered slightly every few seconds, and Laura noticed he seemed to flinch each time it did. She tried once to talk to him about going home, about walking outside, about how everything would be okay. He turned his head to the wall. The next day, she found him trembling while trying to zip a replacement backpack the hospital had given him for his clothes. His hands shook so badly, the zipper snagged on the fabric. His breath came out in short, panicked bursts. Hey, it's okay, she said gently, kneeling in front of him. But Caleb just dropped the bag and stepped back like it had burned him. He wouldn't go near it again. By the end of the week, he wouldn't even look at his old room. The backpack still lay in pieces inside a biohazard bag on the dining room table. The doctors had said to keep it, for legal documentation. But Laura couldn't bring herself to touch it either. Every time she passed it, her stomach turned. Outside, the HOA office windows still glinted in the sun. M. Bennett still patrolled the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, as if none of it had happened. But Laura remembered. Caleb remembered. And that bag, torn open like a carcass, sat there as proof. When the attorney first brought up the idea of a lawsuit, Laura didn't hesitate, not for a second. She didn't ask how long it would take, how much it would cost, or whether they had a real shot. She just looked him in the eye and said, "Do it." It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about the damage left behind, the silence that settled in Caleb's eyes, and the fear that crept into their home like mold, slow, invisible, but suffocating. It was about the way people had watched, recorded, whispered, and then moved on. She wanted accountability. And more than that, she wanted to make damn sure no one else's child ended up lying breathless on the grass with wires spilling out of their backpack because someone in a badge thought they were dangerous. While the legal team gathered documents and filed motions, Laura got to work on her own. She wasn't a lawyer, she wasn't even that organized, but grief had a way of sharpening the mind. She went door to door, quiet at first, unsure how people would respond. But something strange happened. They opened up. They told stories, small at first, then larger. It was like poking a soft spot in the wall and realizing it was all rot underneath. There was a young man down the street, maybe 25, who told her about his grandmother being fined $500 for hanging laundry on her own veranda. They said it disrupted the neighborhood aesthetic, he said, jaw clenched, but it was just sheets drying in the sun. Another woman 2 blocks over confided that her home insurance was dropped after the HOA filed a complaint that her autistic son made disruptive noises while playing in the sandbox. They didn't even talk to me, she said, just logged a violation and sent it to the insurer. I've been uninsurable ever since. Story after story, letters, emails, phone recordings, HOA memos with red ink and bolded words like non-compliance and nuisance behavior. Laura printed them all. She highlighted dates, names. She made spreadsheets, even though she hated spreadsheets. She built a file thicker than a phone book, and the more she found, the angrier she got. This wasn't about Caleb anymore, not entirely. This was about a system weaponized against its own residents, children, seniors, disabled people, working moms, anyone who didn't fit the mold, anyone who made noise or color or needed help instead of pretending everything was perfect. Somewhere along the way, people started paying attention. A local journalist picked up the story, then another. The headline, Boy's Artificial Heart Destroyed by HOA Agent, spread like fire across social media. The lawsuit gained traction, public interest surged, and just like that, M. Bennett disappeared. Her name vanished from the HOA's official site. Her title was quietly removed. No press release, no announcement, just gone. But Laura wasn't satisfied. This wasn't about names on websites. This was about justice that could stand in court and demand to be heard. That's when the HOA's lawyers came back. Their tone was polite, clipped, coated in legal varnish. They proposed a settlement, $30,000, no admission of fault, and a complete waiver of future claims. They were offering to sweep the whole thing under the rug. No trial, no discovery, no questions asked. Just silence in exchange for silence. Laura read the offer on a printout in her living room, the same room where Caleb still wouldn't speak above a whisper, where his replacement heart module sat inside a temperature-controlled case, humming faintly like a reminder, where the backpack, what was left of it, still waited in the corner in its plastic evidence bag. She looked up from the paper and across the room to where her son was curled on the couch, eyes closed but not sleeping. And then she stood, walked into the kitchen, found the pen they'd sent for her signature, snapped it in half. She walked back into the room, dropped the broken pen onto the table, and looked the lead attorney in the eye through the laptop screen. I don't negotiate with people who almost killed my son. He blinked. She leaned in. You tell them this. I'm not settling. I'm not taking hush money. And I sure as hell am not giving them the satisfaction of walking away clean. You let them know. I'm not trading my son's life for a check. The call ended in silence. But something had shifted. Laura had felt helpless for so long, but now she had fire. Now she had momentum. And this time, they were the ones afraid of what came next. When the case finally reached trial, the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, pens poised, cameras off, but ready. The public gallery buzzed with quiet tension. Everyone had an opinion, but today wasn't about opinions. It was about testimony, about facts, about truth laid bare under oath. The attorneys for the HOA came in confident, shoulders back, suits sharp. They expected a fight, but a procedural one. Motions, technicalities. They'd prepared for expert witnesses, maybe an emotional mother, a few sympathetic neighbors. What they hadn't prepared for was the boy. Caleb, 14 years old, pale but steady, walking slowly down the aisle toward the witness stand in a crisp, white button-down shirt that hung just slightly loose around the chest. He clutched it lightly with his right hand, fingers curled over the spot just above his heart. Under the fabric, unseen but undeniably there, pulsed a brand new artificial cardiac module, a gift from an anonymous donor who'd seen the story in the news and decided no child should die for lack of a machine. The courtroom went still as he took the stand. The judge offered a gentle nod. Caleb looked at his mother, then at the jury, then folded his hands together in his lap. His voice was soft when he started, fragile, but it held. "She didn't ask me anything," he said. "She didn't ask what was in my backpack. She didn't even say hello." He paused, swallowed. "She just grabbed it, yanked it off my shoulders. It hurt. I fell. I didn't understand what was happening. She started yelling about rules and threats, but I wasn't doing anything. I was just going to the swings. That's it. Just the swings." He lifted his shirt slightly, exposing the medical port attached just below his collarbone. "This is what she tore out of me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. One juror covered her mouth. "I'm a kid," Caleb said. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't dangerous. I was just walking." He looked over at the HOA table. "She didn't see me. She saw a problem." The silence that followed was loud, heavy. It vibrated through the benches and into the bones of everyone present. The HOA attorneys avoided eye contact. Even the judge looked down for a moment before gently excusing Caleb from the stand. Then came Bennett. She took the stand with her usual stiffness, back straight, chin high, blazer buttoned to the neck. Her lawyer advised her to stay measured, calm. She was anything but. "I panicked," she said bluntly. "There was a hum coming from the bag. It had wires. He wouldn't talk to me. I made a judgment call." The prosecutor tilted his head. "And your training? Did it instruct you to physically remove children's property when you feel panicked?" "No, but in the moment." "Did you notify law enforcement before acting?" "No, there wasn't time." "Did you suspect a bomb?" "I couldn't take the chance." "Then why not evacuate the park? Why not call the police?" "I didn't think—" "No," he cut in, calm but sharp. "You didn't." She bristled. "I am the authority in that community. I don't need police clearance to enforce regulations." There it was. The jury heard it. Everyone heard it. I am the authority. Not a protector, not a neighbor, not someone who paused to ask a question or consider a child's life. Just a title, just a badge on a lanyard, just control. The prosecutor stepped back. "No further questions, Your Honor." When Bennett returned to her seat, there was a shift in the air, a quiet recoil, as if even her own legal team could feel the ground slipping under them. Laura didn't speak that day. She didn't need to. Her son had said everything. The media storm hit like lightning on dry brush. Within hours of Caleb's courtroom testimony, headlines erupted across local and national outlets. "Artificial heart versus HOA bureaucracy," read one banner in bold red letters. Another blared, "Teen nearly dies after neighborhood enforcer rips out life-saving device." Talk radio devoured the story. Morning news anchors repeated the phrase, "backpack with a $100K heart inside," like it was a line from a dystopian novel. But this wasn't fiction. This was suburbia. And suddenly, everyone had something to say. Investigative reporters dug deeper. It didn't take long. What started as one incident unfolded into a years-long pattern of negligence, abuse, and unchecked power. Records showed that under Bennett's tenure, the HOA had violated multiple federal recommendations on disability access and accommodations. Residents with walkers, ramps, therapy animals, and adaptive equipment had been fined, shamed, and threatened with eviction. One case documented how a combat veteran was written up for visual disruption because of the wheelchair ramp installed outside his home. Another detailed a warning letter to a mother whose child with Tourette was accused of disturbing the peace. None of these complaints had gone public. Until now, reporters uncovered emails between board members using language like containment, nonconforming, and neighborhood image. They found internal notes suggesting Bennett had flagged families with special needs children as ongoing issues. The backlash was immediate. Public forums lit up with fury. Petitions circled demanding a full federal review. Civil rights attorneys offered pro bono assistance to any resident who had been targeted. Disability advocacy groups published open letters. What happened to Caleb West, one read, is not an isolated failure. It is a systemic one. And at the center of it all, unintentionally, uncomfortably, was Laura. Her face appeared in interviews, raw and unpolished, always speaking calmly but with unshakable resolve. "We didn't want to become a story," she said on one late-night segment, "but if we are one now, then it better mean something." She refused to speak in sound bites. She didn't play the media game. That's what made her powerful. Her grief wasn't for show. It was real, and so was her fight. Every time a network asked her what she hoped to gain, she gave the same answer: change. And change was coming. The pressure grew so intense that local officials were forced to act. The mayor of the district attended one of the hearings, sitting silently in the back row, his face pale and still. The city council issued a public statement condemning the HOA's practices and promised to introduce new oversight regulations. The state attorney general's office opened a preliminary inquiry. Laura, meanwhile, kept showing up, quietly. Every hearing, every meeting. She brought documents, she asked questions, she refused to be ignored, and as more people came forward, as more residents realized they weren't alone, she became something she'd never imagined, a symbol. Not of rage, but of endurance. Caleb watched it all unfold from a quiet corner of the world. He was still learning to navigate again. He went back to school part-time, escorted between classes by a medical aide. Some kids stared, a few whispered. But most didn't. One even came up to him and said, "You're kind of a badass." He didn't know how to answer that, but slowly he found his voice. He started a blog, not flashy, not dramatic, just his words. A place to talk about living with machines inside you, about the fear that never really goes away, about the strange sensation of being both fragile and stronger than people assume. The blog took off. Other kids began writing back, from across the country. Some had heart conditions, others had spinal implants or breathing tubes or rare genetic disorders. Some just felt invisible. They told Caleb that his story made them feel seen, that he made them feel less broken. He didn't write for attention. He wrote because it made the fear smaller. And Laura, every time she saw him typing, smiled quietly to herself. They hadn't chosen this war, but they were winning it, one line, one step, one truth at a time. The HOA's attorney stood like he still had control. He straightened his cuffs, looked at the jury, and said, "It's tragic, yes, but Caleb West wasn't wearing any form of medical ID. No bracelet, no tag, nothing to indicate he was carrying a life-saving device. My client acted on what she saw, wires, a suspicious object, and no visible medical warning. In that context—" "Stop," the judge interrupted, sharp as glass. The room froze. "You're telling this court that a 14-year-old boy is at fault for nearly dying because he wasn't wearing a bracelet?" The attorney hesitated. "I'm saying—" "No," the judge cut him off again. "You are blaming a child for being attacked while doing nothing more than walking through a park. You think that will fly here?" Silence. Then a single hesitant clap. Another. Then the courtroom broke into steady applause, controlled but powerful. It rolled through the benches like thunder held in human hands. The judge let it sit for a moment before tapping the gavel, not to scold, just to move forward. "This court will not entertain the idea that a child is responsible for someone else's ignorance," he said coldly. The HOA lawyer sat down in silence, his face pale. Caleb stayed quiet too, but this time with his chin slightly raised. He squeezed his mother's hand. Laura looked at him, tears in her eyes, but her mouth held firm. The courtroom recessed. After a week of testimony, witnesses, and mounting public outrage, the jury left to deliberate. They were gone for 52 minutes. 52, not hours, not even one. Just enough time to walk into a room, sit down, and agree on what everyone already knew in their bones. Justice wasn't complicated. It was long overdue. The verdict was unanimous. The courtroom was still when the foreperson stood and read the charges aloud. The HOA was found guilty on all 3 counts: gross negligence, discrimination, and endangerment of a minor. No murmurs, no gasps. Just the sound of truth landing like stone on a table. The judge delivered the sentence without ceremony. The HOA shall pay $2.5 million in compensatory and punitive damages to the West family. Furthermore, This court refers the matter of HOA agent M. Bennett to the district attorney for formal criminal investigation into falsified reports, abuse of power, and violations of disability rights under federal law. There was no outburst, no wild cheers or fists in the air, just silence. A different kind of silence, one full of weight and finality. Laura exhaled deeply, but said nothing. Her eyes were wet, but her face was composed. She took Caleb's hand, and he held on without trembling. Molly Bennett didn't look at them. She kept her eyes fixed on the table in front of her, jaw clenched, her blazer suddenly too tight. Her name would be stripped from every HOA file, her badge revoked, her authority gone. She was no longer the enforcer. She was now the investigated. Outside, the press waited. Dozens of microphones, cameras, a sea of questions. The Wests stepped out into the light, flanked by their attorney and surrounded by flashes and voices, but Laura didn't stop. She guided Caleb gently through the crowd, trying to shield him, but someone called out, "Caleb, Caleb, just one question. What do you want people to take from this?" He stopped, turned slowly. He wasn't wearing a suit, just jeans and a collared shirt, the same white shirt he'd worn in court. He looked so much like a normal kid, but his words made everyone lean in. "I don't want them to just pay money," he said, voice clear but soft. "I want them to change." The crowd went quiet. "I want them to stop breaking kids," he added. "I want them to stop seeing us like problems." Then he turned and walked to the car with his mother. The cameras kept rolling, but there was nothing more to say. His words had landed with more force than any closing argument. Inside the vehicle, Laura exhaled again, this time slower. "It's over," she said. Caleb shook his head slightly. "No, it's just starting." He wasn't wrong. Within days, the case set precedent. Civil rights groups cited the ruling to demand audits of HOAs across the state. A proposed bill, the West Act, began circulating in the legislature to increase protections for medically vulnerable individuals in housing communities. Reporters kept calling, talk shows asked for interviews, but Laura declined most. They weren't chasing fame, they had lives to rebuild. The check arrived 2 weeks later, but it sat unopened on the table for days. Money wasn't the point, it never was. What mattered most was that they'd been heard, that the system, so often blind, had, for once, opened its eyes, that the world had seen a child almost die and chosen to care. Caleb's blog gained thousands of new followers. He posted once after the verdict, "Winning a case doesn't heal you, but it helps you stand up straighter." It wasn't closure, not really, but it was justice. And for now, that was enough. A month after the verdict, Caleb returned to the park. The place looked the same, but everything had changed. There was no shouting, no surveillance, no tension. Just sunlight, quiet grass, and a new sign on the gate that hadn't been there before. Discrimination-free zone, all are welcome. Caleb stood in front of it for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked through. Laura stayed a few steps behind him, watching. The spot where he had collapsed still looked ordinary, just a patch of lawn, but for them, it was a scar. Caleb paused there briefly, then kept walking, each step steadier than the last. The HOA was gone, at least the one they knew. After the verdict, the entire board had been replaced. New members included doctors, parents of disabled kids, and even Caleb's old teacher, Miss Alder. The rules had changed, the people had changed, and maybe, slowly, the place was healing. So was he. Caleb had started speaking at school, about kindness, about being seen, about surviving. Kids listened, teachers listened, strangers listened. He didn't want pity, he wanted progress. And somehow, without trying to be, he'd become a voice people trusted. At the far end of the park stood the swing set. He hesitated for a breath, then he walked to it, sat down, and began to swing. Slow at first, then higher, not to escape, but to rise. Laura sat on a nearby bench, hands in her lap, eyes on her son. For weeks, she'd watched him struggle to trust again, to breathe, to speak, to smile without fear. She had fought courts and lawyers, headlines and shame. But this moment, this silent, ordinary joy, it was everything. He was here, not broken, still whole. They hadn't just survived. They had won.